Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Extra Milestone, your weekly film anniversary podcast where we take a trip to the past to discover the classic films that have made the cinematic landscape what it is today. I am your host, Sam Noland, and I am joined for the first time on Extra Milestone by one of my very good friends in this strange, cruel world of ours. It is my good friend, Guy Simons Jr. Guy, how's it going?
Good. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. You appeared several times on Anyway, That's All I Got, the podcast that I did with Anthony Battaglia and Jason Reed several years ago. And you were one of the first guests that I talked to when Extra Milestone started to expanding. And so I regret taking so long to invite you on the show. But alas, the time has come, and I'm glad that we're here.
So am I, yes. No, I'm very glad to be here. Very happy to be talking about the movies that we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fun time, and we're going to get into that shortly here. But first, for listeners who maybe didn't listen to Anyway, That's All I Got, Guy, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and who you are as a cinephile or otherwise?
Well, I remember one of the earliest movies introducing me to just, cinema as a whole was Star Wars. That was like the biggest part of my life for a long time. And from that point on, I just always wanted to know more and more about movies and how they're made and, everything specific around that.
So Star Wars was your Star Wars then?
Correct.
That's nice. It's not often that actually happens. So
yes, no, it was, you could say it was a new hope in my life.
It was an episode 4, A New Hope.
Yes. I'm so sorry for that.
In the book of your life. Mine was more like an episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
Interesting.
But I digress. I don't even know what that means, but such is the case for many of the things I say.
Exactly.
But yes, this is Extra Milestone, of course. And if you're listening to this around the time when it comes out, that means it's either near or perhaps on Halloween. So I want to wish everyone a very happy Halloween. I know it's a little bit different this year, what with everything that's going on in the world. And that's just, that's just putting it lightly. There are many, many things going on right now.
This is a nightmare.
It kind of is, yeah. And so it's actually very appropriate because this week it's actually really it's actually really fascinating because, as a lot of our listeners might know, we on Extra Milestone have been behind several months for a while now and are slowly catching up to the present in terms of what month we're celebrating the anniversaries and stuff. And so the two movies we're going to discuss today were actually released in September, which is so weird. But because of the little bit of a staggered schedule, it actually worked out perfectly so that this week could be the one where we get to talk about two movies that could arguably be qualified as horror. I think we'll get into that conversation a little bit, but they're both very creeping. They're both very spooky, and they're definitely thrilling and have horror elements to them. So just by sheer fate, it worked out this way. So I think that is something worth celebrating. So Guy, what do you say we get into the good stuff?
Yes, let's get into it. Let's get into the meat of this episode.
We are going to start by talking about, hands down, one of the most iconic and acclaimed movies of all time, is viewed regularly by cinephiles and non-movie lovers alike.
Gentiles, if you will.
There you go. Yeah, I will. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Year round is when it's viewed. And it's a movie that I remember from the first time I saw it, I was completely blown away. I had never seen anything like it, and that maintains to this day. It is none other than Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 horror thriller and perhaps slasher film, Psycho.
I want you to see Psycho the way I originally made it, with every scene intact. The version TV did not dare show. The murderer, you see, crept in here very slowly. Of course, the shower was on. There was no sound, and
see it uncut, intact. No one will be admitted to see it except from the very beginning. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Rated M. Suggested for mature audiences. Parental discretion advised.
So, Guy, I want to know, when I brought up this episode, you seemed relatively enthusiastic about it. So that begs the question: how did you discover Psycho? What's sort of the story of this movie in your life?
I mean, I don't know if my story is too different from anyone else's. It's just sort of, always been a horror classic that I had always heard about before when I was younger, and always seen the classic shower scene, which we'll get to,
right?
Through different various clip shows and YouTube videos and all that, and always wanted to see it. I always wanted to see it. I saw it when I was about 14, I think.
Oh,
and
wow.
Was fascinated by it. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was amazing.
Nice. I actually have kind of a similar story. I remember like it was 5 years ago, because it was 2015. And
exactly 5 years ago.
A little bit over 5 years, but in the same ballpark. I think it was around July or something. And
Gotcha.
I had heard about this movie for so long in the exact same way. Like it was frequently topping lists of the greatest horror movies, best movies of the 60s, best Hitchcock movies even. Mm-hmm. And one day I'm like, I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm going to watch it. And that was actually at a time when movies a little bit older like this were kind of a thing I was slowly coming to approach and to appreciate. And I was like, I'm going to watch Psycho. Apparently, if it's that great, I must like it as somewhat of a newcomer. And I think it almost instantaneously became one of my top 5 movies ever. And spoiler alert, although it's not spoiling anything, I don't know why I said that, it still is. I think it's in number 4 of the most recent list I made of my favorite movies. It has not left the top 5 ever since I first saw it, though. It is really fantastic, and I can't wait to get to discuss it. And yes. One thing that I actually wanted to, I knew about, but it wasn't until doing research for this episode that I really got to figure out a lot of the details, is just how unique of a release this movie has, as in when it was first released back in, I think, July of 1960. It had sort of a limited release and then went wide in September, as I mentioned earlier. And it was kind of unprecedented, the way that it was exhibited to the public. I don't know if you know any of that, Guy.
I know some of it. I know about the, during the trailer it would say, "Don't spoil this to your friends" or whatever. Yeah. So, in the marketing, it had a thing that made people want to go see it, because they were like, what is it? What can I not reveal?
It was, and I don't know if you've seen this, but the trailer for Psycho actually has no footage from the movie. It's very unique in the sense that it is just Alfred Hitchcock walking around the set of the Bates Motel and the mansion next to it, and just saying like, so here's where it happened. Here's where the stabbing took place and all the blood, and oh my. And you would think it sounds like he's spoiling the movie, which in a sense he kind of is. But what he's actually doing is painting the events of the movie as though it were an actual thing that happened, and that this is just sort of a dramatization, or perhaps even almost a documentary look at it, which of course it isn't, because it's a narrative movie and everything.
Right,
but
of course.
It's really unique in the way that it really built up its own myth before it even came out.
Sort of like a Blair Witch Project or something.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, this is definitely a progenitor of that kind of thing. Right down to the fact that, and this is actually kind of one of the most fascinating pieces of trivia about it, this movie made a point, and the distributors and Alfred Hitchcock himself, they made a point of saying to theater owners, okay, what they did most of the time was they would allow anyone, like at almost any point throughout the movie to walk up to the box office and buy a ticket and walk into the movie right in the middle of it. Like they didn't have to be there at the beginning or anything. They could just go in and sort of kill time. Like it wasn't this sort of sacred experience that a lot of people view it as today, of we have to see the whole thing and it's got to be done right. They could just sort of wander in, like catch the last 20 minutes of Robot Monster or whatever was coming out at the time.
Robot Monster. I want to see that.
That is one of the worst movies ever made, by the way. That is
that
the first
real
thing.
Robot Monster? Or is that
yeah.
Oh
it's
my God.
It's very notorious. The Roman. No. Look up Robot Monster and don't thank me later.
I'm gonna seek that out and I'm gonna watch it.
I bet Jason would love this. We got Jason Reed right in the next room from Guy, by the way.
Yes, so he's my roommate.
Yeah, little extra milestone synergy. But regardless, they made a point and they said, do not let anyone in after the movie has started. And to this day, I can attest to this. At the theater where I work at, that is the hard cutoff. The second the trailers before the movie end and the thing starts, that's it. No one can walk in after that. And it's so weird to think that this is kind of right where it started. There were a small handful of other movies that had done something kind of similar, but this was the first one to be publicized as widely as it was. And I believe it may have been the first American movie to do so.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
And they did, and I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember when I think it was Avengers Infinity War and most likely Avengers Endgame, and I think maybe even Star Wars Episode 9, at the theaters where I went to at the time, they had posters and placards all throughout the lobby saying, do not talk about the events of this movie in the lobby because someone might hear and they might get it ruined for them. They said like they were very strict about it, about ruining the experience for others.
Whoa!
Turns out, you do remember that?
No, I did not. I actually saw Star Wars like a week after it premiered because there was just stuff going on in my life at the time. I wasn't able to see it premiere night, but I saw like a week later, so that definitely wasn't still happening. I just had to like really avoid Twitter aggressively in order to have the unspoiled experience.
I think everyone stopped caring after a week.
Right,
the natural implication.
That too, yeah. After a week, everyone was like, "It's fine."
Yeah, all right, yeah, that happened.
Yeah, let's move on.
But regardless, as it turns out, it kind of started with Psycho. They had all these things, actually standees of Alfred Hitchcock in like theater lobbies and stuff, which is so funny to just imagine walking into like the picture house and see, oh, there's a cardboard cutout of Alfred Hitchcock asking me not to talk about this movie. The most fascinating thing is that the movie is based off of the 1959, I want to say, novel by Robert Bloch. And what happened was that Hitchcock bought the rights to the novel and then bought as many copies of the book as he could so that no one could figure out what happened. Like, took this incredibly seriously and said wanted to create an experience unlike any other. And it made me realize that Psycho is kind of an experimental movie in a lot of ways, not just in the way that it was creating this theatrical experience that had never been done before and did so very successfully, not to mention that as well, but also just the movie itself. It was a very obvious departure from a lot of the work that he had done up to that point. Like just in the handful of years before, he'd done Vertigo and North by Northwest. Those were both like, Technicolor marvels with huge budgets and stuff that just went across not necessarily the globe, but just a ton of different locations. This movie is very intimate and very cheap on purpose. It's the soundstage is the exact same set that was used for Alfred Hitchcock Presents, the television show that he did in the 50s. And it was just very, very shoestring production and stuff. The special effects were pretty elementary, although there were a few things they needed to throw a little money at. And it's just sort of it almost feels like a B movie, especially because it's in black and white. That was to save money. That was kind of their thesis. Like, if people see these like really bad movies, there's a reason I brought up Robot Monster. If they see that in the theaters and just think nothing of it, what are they going to think when they see a movie that they think isn't going to be that good, that they think is just going to be some, generic pot boiler, and it happens to be one of the best movies ever? It's a good thing that it ended up being that, wouldn't you say?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I didn't know that the reason why they chose to shoot it in black and white was to save money. I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. I think it might have been a stylistic choice as well, which also works dramatically. But yeah, it was a lot of it was just to sort of give this unassuming impression, like we're not some big, event picture, at least not on the surface.
Gotcha.
And yet there's all this stuff lurking under the surface, and the fact that they kept it such a mystery only added to the mystique of it, to the point where it dramatically overperformed. And what's funny is that Alfred Hitchcock, instead of I might be remembering some details incorrectly, but up until that point, what he had done most of the time was just accepted salary pay for every movie. And he said, okay, instead, I'll just take, I think it's like 60% of the profits of this movie. And because all of the distributors didn't think it would do that well, they're like, sure. And he ended up making like hundreds of millions of dollars off of it. So Alfred Hitchcock, a real cheeky minx when it comes to the production of this movie, which I love. And if you watch the trailer that I mentioned earlier, where he's just going around the hotel and the mansion, it's just so awkwardly staged. Like, there's a reason Alfred Hitchcock is not an actor. Let me just put it that way. He's not very convincing at it, and is clearly like putting on a performance. And so it's just kind of funny to watch. And yet he really is the mastermind behind all of this. And so I think that makes it all the more valuable. And one other fun fact before we actually get into the movie itself is, and I just thought this was hilarious. After a few years after this movie came out, and I don't know what it was for, but Alfred Hitchcock wanted to shoot part of a movie at Disneyland, and Walt Disney himself said no.
Of course,
because you made that horrible movie Psycho. So even Walt Disney was just appalled by this thing. So I think that should tell you.
Is Alfred Hitchcock the reason why no one can film at Disneyland?
You know what? I would not be at all surprised. So I don't know if we're better or worse off because of it, right. Honestly.
Who knows?
We may never know.
Yeah, truly.
But regardless, that is all this stuff is just to sort of add to the legacy of the movie, mm-hmm. I think.
And lend some context.
Yeah, just show where it's coming from. Because I think more so than a lot of movies we talk about, there's actually a lot that went into the production and distribution of this movie. So I thought that was definitely worth bringing up. But the time has come. And now I want to say this. Now, usually on Extra Milestone, and this goes for both of the movies we're going to discuss today. Usually on Extra Milestone, we're pretty willy-nilly about spoilers. We tend not to go out of our way to reveal things that happen. With both of these movies, and I don't say this often, there are huge things that happen in it. Huge. And if you don't know them, then there's a good chance that the movie might be not necessarily ruined, but definitely altered if you hear what is going on.
Oh, so if you haven't seen it, leave now, because I'm going to spoil the ending right at the beginning.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
You can. We can sort of jump around, but regardless, that I just want to clear up that this is sort of a unique case in which, yes, I think the spoilers, to use the common phrase, actually do matter. Right.
Yes.
And which is not always the case. In fact, it almost never is. And these are two of the ones where it does.
Yeah, so, very important if you don't know the ending.
Just keep that in mind over the course of this entire episode. With that in mind, we already sort of established this, that we're both very big fans of the movie. But Guy, yes. Tell me, you rewatched the movie Psycho for this episode.
Yes.
What takeaways did you have this time that you hadn't had before? What's something that occurred to you that hadn't before, if there is anything?
I mean, mainly just how actually like pretty creepy it is. It never really creeped me out before. For some reason, this time I was just watching it by myself in my room, and I was like, "It's actually like really unsettling." Like Tony Perkins is really good as Norman Bates, and he really is very unsettling at certain points.
Yeah, I think I remember that being my biggest takeaway the first time I saw it is, wow, this actor is so unbelievably convincing as this character who clearly is not quite all right in the head,
right?
Has experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of just really horrible things throughout his life, and yet is able to play that sort of split role so well. I'll never forget, and we're sort of jumping around a little bit, but the scene sort of a little bit later on in the movie where Martin Balsam as the private investigator shows up at the Bates Motel and is starting to ask like, so did anyone has anyone come to visit your hotel recently? And he's trying and failing so hard to play it off.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, God bless him. He really tried to wiggle his way out of this. Like, no one showed up. Oh, well, I see a name right here at the registry. Oh, you know what? I'm starting to remember now. Yeah. I'm like, oh, dude.
Yeah, the second you start backpedaling in that situation, you're done. Like, he already knows that you've murdered that person.
Exactly. And it's actually, and that brings me to kind of one of the most interesting points. And I remember reading Roger Ebert's review about this some time ago. And he mentioned that there is a scene in this movie that is very integral, that might not seem like it on the surface, but actually it's kind of the key to why it's so successful. And it's after the shower scene, which we'll trace back through the entire plot in a minute. But it's right after the shower scene. And it's when Norman Bates comes down, sees what's happened, and what follows is just like, I think it might be like 5 or 6 minutes maybe of just tidying up the crime scene.
Yeah. It's
just like
very unsettling.
It really is, especially with just the way he's able to like sort of collect himself and be like, oh, okay, I just got to deal with this now.
Yeah.
Watching it the first time, you might be sort of like, what's going on?
Yeah.
I have no idea. And what's happening in that scene is that we're seeing a shift in protagonists. We're seeing that this character that we followed for about half the movie up until that point. I think I remember checking the time. It's about an hour in when Janet Leigh as Marion Crane is killed. And it's almost 2 hours. So functionally, it's half the movie. Mm-hmm. And then is just murdered, like really unceremoniously. Mm-hmm. Which is remarkably unexpected. I think it's part of the reason why they wanted to hide what was going on in the movie so much, is because if you knew that going in, the surprise would not hit so hard.
Yeah, it's a bold move to kill off your main protagonist an hour into the film.
It really is, especially when there was this whole other story going on up until that point.
Right.
And that's what I love, is that the story of someone stealing $40,000, going on the run, and just trying to evade capture and make a new life away from it all. That's a movie, right there. Like that doesn't even need anything. But then it wanders into a slasher movie, kind of by accident. Like just pulls into the motel, and now this other genre is going to envelop everything, and so. It's really remarkable in the way that it switches genre kind of on a dime, and then also switches protagonist, where we see Norman Bates doing all this stuff, cleaning up the crime scene. And then kind of the most telling scene is when he goes to push Marion's car into like that swamp that's nearby. And then for a second, it looks like it's not going to sink completely. And I want to hear your reaction to this in a second. But every time I watch that, I've been like, oh no, it's not going to sink. And then I realize I'm a monster.
Yeah, why am I on this guy's side all of a sudden?
Exactly. Yeah. It's so weird. Do you have the same reaction to that?
No, I had the exact same reaction today. I saw that, and I've seen this movie multiple times, but for some reason, every time that happens, I go, no! And then I'm like, wait, what? Why? Bring it together. Why do you feel bad for this guy? He's crazy.
It's such a strange thing that this movie does. And then the rest of that is, of course, the investigation. And for a while, it's like, okay, we want everything to turn out okay, but we also are not entirely sure what's going on. And so the fact that the mystery is held throughout the entire thing only adds to the power of it. But I want to backtrack a little bit because we haven't focused a whole lot on kind of the first half of the movie. So it opens and we see Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, who's just remarkable in this movie. Only Oscar nominated actor for this movie. Weird.
Oh, wow.
You'd think Anthony Perkins would have been nominated as well, but alas, this was not the time. And
interesting.
With her lover, Sam Loomis, played by John Gavin, who I'm sure you know this, was almost cast as James Bond.
I did not know that, actually. Wow.
Oh, really?
I think that might be the first time you said a James Bond fact that I didn't already know. I did not know that he was considered for James Bond. That's crazy.
I have my secrets.
Yes, you do.
But yeah, it was after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, George Lazenby left. They cast John Gavin as a way to taunt Sean Connery into coming back.
I love how much of a vendetta Cubby Broccoli had against Sean Connery after he left those movies.
John Gavin, who the hell does he think he is? I'm coming back.
I love how much they hated each other. Have you seen that clip of Sean Connery on Johnny Carson or whatever?
Oh no, what happened?
I forgot exactly what the question is, but it's something along the lines of, do you know who the next villain is for the next movie or whatever? And Sean Connery just goes, Cubby Broccoli. And then, which is like really inside baseball for the audience, because like, how did they know who Cubby Broccoli is? But
yeah, unless they paid really close attention to the credits,
right.
they're not gonna know who that is.
Exactly.
It's like we're off on a tangent, but so be it. This is Extra Milestone. There was this theory, and I have no idea if it was ever concluded in any way, that when Avengers 3 Infinity War came out, that Thanos was modeled after Joss Whedon.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever heard that theory?
No, I have heard that, yes.
Like, I can kind of see it. That's such a weird thing, though. I don't see I don't see what they're so upset about.
Right. He didn't do anything to them specifically. Just the fans were mad at him, not the other way around.
Oh, my. The inner workings of the entertainment industry are an enigma that we may never understand.
Oh, it's fascinating.
It really is. But regardless, we're getting back to the actual movie we're talking about. So, Psycho. Mm-hmm. It's really good.
It's a solid film.
It really is. That's putting it lightly. But anyway, so yeah, they just want to get away from it all, and we find out that Marion is working as sort of like a desk clerk at this little loan office is the sense I get. And then this guy comes in and is just this really like boisterous fellow and says like, yeah, my daughter's getting married and here's my wedding present to her. Holds up this huge thick envelope. It's $400,000 in cash.
It's a lot of money, yeah, especially for
what
the 60s.
The hell? Yeah, like that's I found out. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's something like $300,000 today, like adjusted for inflation. Did I say 400,000? I meant 40,000.
Yeah, I think it's 40 is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I may have confused it too, but regardless, it's a huge stack of money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, the 60s, man. You just carry cash around in this volume all the time. It's weird to me that they're surprised she took it.
Yeah. It's
like, all right.
Very easy to just keep it.
Take this envelope and take it over to the bank and deposit it all. It's just $40,000 in untraceable bills. Right.
Exactly.
that we're just letting you have. And so,
and if you run away with it, we might never find you again because we don't have the internet.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a good thing that security is a little stronger these days in this specific scenario.
Yes, agreed.
But regardless, and I like that she takes like it's kind of an immediate decision, like, oh, this is it. This is my chance. I'm going to take this money and run away with it. And she pretends like, oh, I'm not feeling well.
Precisely.
It's like, okay, you can go home after this. I'm like, this is a very lax work environment. I will say that right now.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore. You can't be like, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to head out early.
Especially when there's only like 3 employees in the entire office.
Right. It's
but
like a very empty office. Yes, continue.
It really does. She decides, okay, I'm going to take off with it, and then sees her boss on the street corner. And I remember always getting really terrified, like, oh gosh, this is going to be it. And what happens after that, and this is something I've always found really fascinating, and I have kind of a unique interpretation of it that I want to hear your thoughts on. But we see these shots of Janet Leigh driving, and it's just her face in the car. And we're hearing this voiceover of the of like the police and her friends and her sister talking about, so where do you think Marion went? Oh, I saw her. I saw her leaving the other day. I'm not sure exactly what was going on. And I think there are actually a couple ways to interpret this. The first one is that it's just Marion imagining what those conversations might be like. I think that's a reasonable assumption. The way I've always looked at it is that it's sort of jumping into the future, and this is like the clues that will eventually lead to a story of a disappearance and later a death. Like it's something that you might read in the newspaper, like a quote from a friend or an acquaintance or whatever. And I think that builds upon the sort of almost documentary like approach that they took to this movie. Does that make any sense what I'm describing?
No, that makes complete sense. I totally get that. I've always sort of thought of it as more of Hitchcock sort of mirroring the relationship between Marion and Norman, because she gets a voiceover at the beginning of the film, and then he also gets a voiceover at the end of the movie, but it's his mother's voice instead.
I had never thought about that. That's fascinating. So really showing that they really are sort of destined
to meet,
to cross paths.
Yes, that's how I always took it.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, and like, you know, as she's driving down the road, the camera pushes in further and further, closer and closer to her face, and it does the same thing at the end with Norman Bates, as it pushes closer and closer, and it both ends with both of them sort of smiling directly at the camera and then fading into something else.
Wow, that I had never even thought about that. That's really fascinating. It's that's brilliant. I got it. I got to hand it to you for that.
I appreciate that.
Really, really, really mirroring the experience. Yeah, there's a lot of like straight on close-ups of this movie. And it's at this point where I want to acknowledge this is a silly thing and it has nothing to do with anything, but I love the staged cars in this movie. Like, they're so funny to me because there's something I always love staged cars, because that's, if you don't know, that's when they have an actor in like a fake sort of the body of a car, and then a background of like a road is projected onto a green screen in the background or something like that. And I always love seeing it because they're always driving in a straight line, and then the actor, for whatever reason, is just turning the wheel willy-nilly.
Just jerking it left and right.
just to sort of, feign that they're driving. Right. And it's something so funny to me. I think it's best in this movie later on when we see, I think it's Vera Miles driving the car, and she's just turning the wheel willy-nilly, and the car is not turning at all. And I just love that little detail.
Yeah, no, that happens a lot in the James Bond movies, and I appreciate that a lot. Just Sean Connery just aggressively steering.
That's something that Quentin Tarantino paid homage to in Pulp Fiction when Bruce Willis gets in the taxi cab.
Right.
It's like a really obvious staged car to kind of a comical degree.
Right.
And so I think that's really funny. But we digress.
Yes.
And
again,
she starts getting tailed by a highway patrolman. And this is just such a time capsule right here, is that over the course of like 5 minutes, she's able to pull into this used car lot, get rid of her car, and just get a new one. Yeah. And that's all it takes. Just $700 in cash right there.
Cash.
And I'm like, my goodness. Yeah.
Which today isn't that crazy, but for the 60s, that's insane to pay $700 in cash.
And I'm just talking about the simplicity of it all. Like,
That
there's
too,
almost
yeah.
nothing to sign. There's nothing to, like, inspect the car or anything. There's not like a waiting period.
Right.
I'm like, man, to live in the 1960s and
be
just
a
to
white
be able
person.
to exactly. Well, that's true. Yeah. Just to be able to go in and get a car if you feel like it.
if you're so inclined.
And so there are so many things in this movie that I find just such a unique time capsule, and it's part of the reason why I love it. But eventually she finds her way to the Bates Motel, and it's at this point where the movie starts to change, as we mentioned thus far, and it becomes kind of the first, at least one of the first slasher movies. This is something that's brought up a lot about what was actually the first, and there are a few ways to look at it, where what was the first to really incorporate some very specific motifs and cliches and plot points. A lot of people will point to John Carpenter's Halloween, or Bob Clark's Black Christmas, or even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm curious.
So sorry. I was going to say I never thought about that. Michael Myers also uses a kitchen knife, which is the same knife that the
That's
mom
true.
uses in this movie. Sorry.
It's funny. The I forget what occupation he has, but the character played by Donald Pleasance in Halloween is named Sam Loomis. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh wow. Okay. Everything's clicking for me right now. I gotta.
Named after John Gavin's character in Psycho. So John Carpenter knew.
I've never put that together.
Clever man, that Carpenter, I say.
Good old Johnny boy.
But regardless, I'm curious, what do you have an opinion on this, about whether or not Psycho counts as a slasher movie?
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about it a lot since I watched it, because I watched it earlier today. If I actually consider this like a slasher movie, I want to say yes, because the scenes can be brutal at times. They never show like, a full on stab, but it can be brutal at times. So I guess yes.
Yeah,
I guess yes.
It's definitely a thin line, and I think I've thought about it a little, not at huge lengths or anything, but I think I am actually going to say no, and here's why: is because the slasher movies sort of emerged in the early to mid 70s and were kind of just a huge thing for a couple of decades, until the 90s at the earliest, and perhaps even longer than that. And not that it necessarily has to be sequestered to that time period, but I think if you were to watch like a Friday the 13th movie, a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, a Halloween movie, and Psycho would feel really out of place. And I think it's because of that structure where it starts as one thing and then becomes something else. I think the fact that it happens to be a guy with a knife killing people is kind of incidental. I think that's just, that just happens to be part of the movie. It's not necessarily that they were leaning into a genre. I think slashers were very specifically trying to tap into kind of this lurid teenage motif of the time, and had a lot of elements of revenge and legacy and stuff like that. I think there's part of that in Psycho, but I think at the end of the day, it does become its own thing. But at the same time, you can definitely see that this is the movie that, with its minimalism and with its sort of haunting atmosphere throughout the whole thing, was definitely being viewed a lot by the pioneers of the slasher genre over a decade later. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, it's very obvious that this influenced a lot of movies after it.
Yeah. And it's clear to see why. So from here is when the actual, I don't want to say the real movie, but the actual movie sort of emerges, and we find out what this thing is actually, which is sort of a look into just sort of the haunted places of Earth. You know what I'm saying? Where like there's just all this sort of evil sort of festering in the little corners where not everyone is even looking until they realize that they're there, and then it's too late. And it's, again, like you mentioned earlier, it lends to that creepy factor. And to this day, I will think about this movie and many others That's just one of my greatest fears, is just finding myself in the clutches of one of these evil places. You know what I'm saying?
No, I agree. And I think what it's sort of trying to do is show, sort of like the darkness taking over her, over Marion's character. Because, I feel like she starts off like, to use a Star Wars term, on the light side, and then steals the money, and then just slowly more and more crosses over into the dark, which I think is what that, the whole sequence of her driving down the road, because it starts off in the day and then becomes dark as she gets closer to the Bates Motel. And
that's true.
I feel like it's, showing her crossing over to this different side of the world. She's sort of crossing a threshold into, whatever you want to call Norman Bates' world.
The psycho world, let's call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, but you're absolutely right. And it's and one thing I love about this movie that I always just kind of take this weird delight in, Marion Crane is a bad fugitive. Like, seriously,
Yes.
Even if she weren't murdered in cold blood for reasons that she had no control over, I highly doubt she would have been able to get away with this. Like,
no, she would have maybe made it to Oregon. And
maybe
then they would have found her. Because she made it to California and they tracked her down pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I feel like she might have made it just outside California, and then they would have pounced on her.
Like, it wasn't hard at all. Like, what is her end game here? Because, and I think that's sort of the whole point, is that this was on just an impulse. Like, oh, suddenly this $40,000 blessing landed in my lap. Of course, I'm going to take it. Why not? Sorry, I've got the hiccups. I'm getting so emotional about this movie.
It's an emotional film.
It is, isn't it?
It's heavy.
But yeah, she is acting on impulse. And what I like is that when she eventually has a conversation with Norman Bates and realizes, like, you know what? I didn't have things that bad. Like, I made a mistake, and I think it's time that I went back. And I actually speaking to what you were saying about sort of the light going into the darkness, and I hadn't noticed this. I'm going to make sure to pay attention to it next time. The opening scene of the movie, where she's in the hotel room with John Gavin, she has on a white bra, and then later in the movie, right before she gets killed, she has on a black one.
Wow.
So just going to illustrate that difference earlier. But then, even though she's deciding to not to go through with it, it's still at night. So she's still in that world of darkness, and thus is, while sort of, and of course we're getting to the very iconic shower scene here. It's sort of a way to illustrate that, okay, she has decided to sort of cleanse herself of sin, or perhaps attempted or considered sin at the very least. And yet, there's no turning back. It's almost as if, and I'm only just now thinking about this, so I'm sort of going to be talking it out in real time. Is her fate? Is it a punishment, or is it just sheer accident and sheer chance that anyone could find themselves in? Do you have a thought on that? Right as I say it?
Ooh, I had not thought about that.
This is why the movie's so good. We're still discovering
new things
as we're talking about it.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I don't know. I think she just stumbles upon it. I don't feel like it was meant to be a punishment for her character.
I think so too.
It sort of just feels like she just happens to stop at this motel where Norman Bates works,
Mm-hmm. Well, because here's the thing. If everyone were punished in this way, if they were murdered out of the blue for any sort of, for stepping out of line in any way, whether it's, legally or whatever, then no one would be alive still. There's, everyone is guilty of sin, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And
I think the PI might be the only one that's like, fine.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so.
I don't think he deserves to get killed.
And he's got lots of work if everyone's getting killed.
Right. So that's true. Fair point.
That's certainly an aspect to consider. Mm-hmm. But regardless, I agree. I think that this is just, it's sort of allowing us to sympathize with her, saying like, yes, we've all made mistakes and some of us have been lucky enough to realize it before it was too late and go back on it. But what if right when we decided to do the right thing, what if this X factor were introduced to our lives and that was it? Like that was the end of everything. And so that's what makes it so horrifying, is just how out of nowhere it shows up. Like we've been introduced, like we know that Norman's mother is living up in the house and is a little strict and stuff.
Right. And he's a little odd.
Yeah, of course, naturally. And I think Anthony Perkins portrays that really well. I love that he's got a bag of candy corn. Like that's kind of, that's just this funny little bit. Apparently that was Anthony Perkins' choice. They were allowed a lot of improvisation to sort of make their characters their own. Matter of fact, Janet Leigh, in her own head, created an entire backstory for Marriott Crane that never showed up in the movie, but just informed her character that much more. So I think that's very, very good acting right there.
No, it's fascinating.
What was I talking about earlier? How the, oh gosh. My ADD is crazy.
I also got distracted by
the candy corn.
Candy corn, yeah.
Do not get distracted by candy corn.
I forgot now. Norman Bates and his mom. Oh, you were talking about how turning back. She was about to turn back.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how, you know, this is sort of like, okay, I'm just gonna take a shower. I'm going to start anew. I might have to wiggle my way out of this, but you know, I'm gonna make things right.
Plus, they said when I think I forgot who says it. Someone says at some point that they aren't gonna press charges for her stealing the money. Is what someone says at some point. So like she could have very easily just come back and just gave the money back and everything would have been fine. You know, she probably could have went back to her normal life and everything would have been great. Yeah. But, you know, very quickly things go south.
Yeah. And it's this sort of just attempt to, in air quotes, get away from it all, you know, the daily grind, the having a job and having, you know, rent to pay and everything. What if I could just escape from it all? And what she finds out is that that's not really a thing that we can do. And shortly after that, is murdered very gruesomely. And it's in the iconic shower scene with, I found out in doing research, that scene originally had no score to it.
Oh, wow.
I can't imagine that. And apparently Bernard Herrmann, the brilliant composer for this movie, apparently Hitchcock said, yeah, don't bother with a score. And he was like, well, I'm going to effing do it anyway. And here, take a look at this, Hitch. And then Alfred Hitchcock was like, say it was turned around. So just composing music on the sly, and to this day it is one of the most iconic pieces of film music of all time. Just those screeching violins, it's almost hard to listen to.
Yeah, so it kind of hurts almost.
It really does, and it makes it all the more effective that this person is getting killed. Apparently they used chocolate syrup for blood because it showed up better on camera.
That makes sense.
Nice little fact. I don't think that would have been nearly as convincing in color. It's like, why is Marion Crane dripping chocolate?
Is she an alien? What movie is
that? Would have been that would have. Can you imagine that? That's movie? The B movie I want to see.
Marion as an alien,
but she doesn't know she's an alien. It's like The Thing.
Ooh, now that could be really interesting.
That's what I want to see.
John
Hollywood,
Psycho.
I know you're listening. Get on it.
They're always listening. Every podcast.
They really are. But anyway, and it's just this huge shock. And apparently it was very traumatizing naturally to many audience members, including Janet Leigh. That's the funniest thing, is that this scene took a week to film. And it wasn't until she saw the complete edited version that she got really scared and actually never took a shower again.
She never took a shower again?
Yeah.
That's unsanitary, but... Wow.
Oh, well, she took baths. I mean, that's...
I see what you're okay.
Yeah.
I thought you meant she just never bathed.
No.
Period.
Yeah, that would have been very strange. Yeah. Just wandered into a waterfall once a week, and that was everything.
That was the most she did. Gotcha. That's fascinating. That's crazy.
Because it's just the vulnerability, you know?
And that'd be horrifying. Who doesn't have that fear of just like being in the shower and just having someone burst into the bathroom at your most vulnerable moment?
Yeah. Luckily, I'm 6'7", so I can always see over the curtain.
Same, yeah.
Did I say 6'7"? I meant 6'5". I don't know why I said 6.
We're both 6'5", by the way, for those of you who are listening.
That's true. Welcome to the Tall Young Man podcast.
The Tall Cast.
With Sam and Guy Gam. No?
Sort of works.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. We can work it out later.
Yeah, we'll figure it out off mic.
We keep digressing. But such is the nature. Such is the nature of our conversations. Yes, I think it's fine.
Always.
And of course, this was a huge sort of censorship bugaboo because this was 1960. It was after the production code. It still technically existed, but it had certainly waned. Like no one really cared enough to impose anything incredibly strict at the time.
So I feel like people were still making like weird stuff at this time and like not really following the Hays production code.
Yeah, they were sort of just getting it released where they could. But yeah, this was also notably the first American movie, at least, where a toilet was seen flushing on camera. Very scandalous this movie is.
Yeah. A lot of firsts with this one.
A lot of firsts. And
breaking
so
records left and right.
It only goes to that cultural and historical significance. And then what follows after that for the next 45 minutes is just the investigation of what the hell happened. And it's sort of, I feel like the second half of this movie is sort of riding the high from the first half. Like, objectively speaking, the rest of this movie and even the beginning, it's sort of everything except for that middle section, which we just fixated on, is sort of just a very, at least by our modern eyes, kind of a standard like missing person sort of investigative thing. There's nothing.
The second half is like a cop procedural. It's like an episode of Law and Order. The second half.
It really is. Except they think that they're dealing with something very, very normal by the books. Of course, someone's missing. That there's nothing normal about that. But they've dealt with this before, and what we, the audience, know is that no, they haven't. This is something really unusual, and it's a miracle that only one other person died because of it.
Yes, very much a miracle, a breakthrough, if you will.
Yes, a psychotic breakthrough.
Yes,
something like that. And it just actually, weirdly enough, I don't have a whole lot to say about that second half except that it's very tense and it's very just the way that it slowly reveals what's going on, where we find out that Marion or Norman Bates' mother died 10 years ago.
Yeah,
and
that was
who's buried up on top of that hill? Whoa!
Yeah, no, I honestly forgot about the reveal that he's the one who killed his mom and her lover, and that honestly really shocked me.
Yeah,
watching it this morning, I was like, "Wait, I've seen this before. What am I doing?"
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen this. It's actually been since like 2016, so I didn't realize it had been that long. So it was wonderful to get to go back to it. That's one thing I love about Extra Milestone is I don't rewatch movies a lot,
right?
Like just as a habit, but when I get to, I make sure to revel in it, and so I'm fortunate to get the chance to do that a lot of the time on this very show. But yeah, and then it just goes on, and we find out that wait a minute, it was Norman all along,
right under your nose,
right under our noses, and
the last place you'd expect.
Why, she wouldn't even hurt a fly. And it's this wonderful, wonderful ending. And I think, and I want to get one last, I want to talk about one last thing specifically. I want to ask you, Guy.
Yes.
Not the very ending, like not the last shot of this movie, but kind of right before that, the sort of winding down where Norman has been apprehended, or perhaps Norman's mother as well has been apprehended. And we have this psychologist come in and just sort of take like 5 minutes explaining everything about the character. And the movie has gotten a lot of retroactive criticism saying this is a little unnecessary. It drags on a little too much. I'm curious, what is your stance on that? Do you think it's a little bit unnecessary, or do you think it only adds to sort of, put a button on the movie,
I think it's necessary for the time it was released, because this is like one of the first of these movies to do that sort of reveal. I feel like with our modern eyes, we're like, all right, that's a bit unnecessary, because I feel like today you would just need a few like cutaways to like a framed picture or something, then you would sort of figure it out yourself. But I feel like during the time it came out, people weren't used to that, so I think that was very necessary.
Yeah.
But like even with my modern eyes, I didn't hate it. I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
Like I just I don't know what else to say about it. I just thought it was fine. I didn't hate it, didn't love it.
It does stick out a little bit. I think
it is
kind of hard to deny.
Yeah.
It's hard to deny. It is a little bit awkward just to have this like whole 5-minute experience. Like, so wait, doctor, what you're telling me is, yes, that's what I'm telling you, my dear, or stuff like that. Like, it's clearly very staged, very written. I get the sense that the person who played this psychiatrist just sort of had to read the lines.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a version of this movie that would be slightly improved if some of that were cut out. Like if it were just a few lines to get the point across. Like I forget exactly what he says, but he says something like Norman Bates doesn't exist anymore, at least not completely, or something like that. And then maybe one or two other lines, and then cut to the final voiceover with, she wouldn't even hurt a fly. I think that's fair to say, but also I think it does help to sort of understand. And again, this movie is very 1960, as we've established. There are a lot of things that they're to the point where it's so weird to me that the TV show Bates Motel takes place in the modern day. Like, okay, I get that it's kind of just like rebooting it, but even still, it's just so strange to see. And yet we know that there's never any illusion that this is any time except 1960. So I think it works ultimately. Does not take very much away from this movie, but there is again an alternate cut where it is better. So we've talked a lot about this movie, and I think we're only kind of just scratching the surface of what makes it so effective, but I feel like we got a fair amount across. Is there any final thoughts you had that you wanted to give about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho?
Yes, one thing about the ending, since we were just talking about it, the thing that I find interesting about it is that it sort of comes full circle from the beginning, in that the very beginning of the movie feels much more objective. Like the camera doesn't feel to be following anyone.
Okay.
At first, and then you get Marion's, and then it switches to Norman, and then it switches to Sam and her sister, whose name is escaping me at the moment. And then it comes
Lila Crane, Vera Miles.
Lila, yes, thank you. And it goes to their perspective, and then it sort of goes back again to an objective perspective with all of them just sort of sitting in the room. The camera feels a little bit more wide in that scene than the other ones to me.
Yeah,
so it feels more objective, and then sort of back into Norman Bates's head. And then the last shot of the film is them pulling the car out of the swamp.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I just felt like it sort of just goes in a circle.
That's really fascinating. I hadn't thought about that. It's weird to think. There are a lot of times when I think about a movie like from beginning to end, and I think, wow, the first scene and the last scene sometimes don't even feel like the same movie. And I think that's actually a good sign, is that an arc has been achieved. Not necessarily indicative of a good movie, but a lot of times it is. Yeah. And I think that definitely qualifies. And they actually, I don't know the exact details or ratios or whatever, but they used a very specific lens and camera to actually replicate like the human field of vision, which is very effective. And I think it lends this sort of voyeur aspect to the entire thing. Hell, the first thing we see is a camera like creeping into an apartment window. Right. So,
and you get, later POV shots of Norman creeping on Marion and all that,
A lot of really innovative stuff with the camera. I think when Martin Balsam gets killed and it's like way up high.
It's very high, yeah. I wrote that scene down in my notes.
Yeah, just everything from bird's eye view it's remarkably effective. And so almost everything about this movie is not what it would seem and is revolutionary. And I will say everything about it is great. I love it. And
I agree.
I'm glad that we got to talk about it. And
same.
I just love watching it every time and seeing again, it's all about that middle section that just glues everything together.
Yes.
And
it's rare for like the second act of the movie to be the best of the movie, I feel like. You know what I mean?
Or at least the most memorable. So
right, the most memorable, yeah.
A lot of times it's just sort of bridging the gap.
Right.
And it just has one of my favorite visual metaphors of all time where Marion is in the shower and then Norman's mother, Teehee, comes in, stabs her to death, and then the water keeps going. It's like what we have put in motion will continue after we are gone. And it's all about just trying to do the right thing, you know?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I never thought about it like that. Wow.
It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
So I love it. I can never get enough of it. And I wanted to watch the sequels. Yes, the sequels.
Yes.
3 of them to Psycho. I didn't have the chance, but I want to try and make time for that because it is October after all. So maybe I'll be able to get to that soon. Have you ever seen the remake, the Gus Van Sant remake?
I have not. I've always wanted to. I've always been so curious about it, but I've heard it's bad.
It's not great, but it's also kind of a fascinating experiment. Just seeing, can we recreate the greatness of a movie just by replicating it shot for shot? As it turns out, nope.
The answer is no.
Not even close.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it exists, and for such a revolutionary movie that's kind of specific to its time, really fascinating stuff. So I don't like the movie, but I appreciate that it exists. Gotcha. If that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense.
So Psycho comes out and it gets kind of a mixed response, but very quickly is recognized as one of the better movies of all time. And I think we can both concur with that. And of course, and again, we mentioned that it's sort of inadvertently 15 years down the line, sort of influenced an entire horror subgenre.
Definitely. And
then we cut to 1995.
Ah, the 90s.
A much different type of serial killer movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is, of course, our second feature of the evening, a movie that I like to call Se7en.
Yes.
I can never not say it like that. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to pronounce the number in titles where there's a number in it.
Your classic fanforstic.
That's kind of that's one of the most notorious ones. I think Scriforum is another great one.
Is another good one, yeah.
Yeah, and there are others, of course, that we're forgetting, but it is just a funny way to look at a title in a new way.
Mm-hmm. It's a fun little gag for yourself.
It really is, yeah.
Do you like what you do for a living? These things you see?
You have to wear blinders sometimes. Most times.
Detective William Somerset is looking for a way out.
You're retiring. 6 more days and you're all the way gone.
So how long have you lived here?
Too long.
Detective David Mills is looking for a way in.
We'll be spending every waking hour together from now until the time I leave. I'll show you who your friends and enemies are.
Look, I've worked homicide 5 years. Not here.
Now,
ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a homicide.
They're caught in a game.
No fingerprints and no witnesses of any kind.
Nope. About the only thing we know about that guy right now is he's totally insane.
Where the price of sin is death.
There are 7 deadly sins. Gluttony.
You're going to come take a look at this?
Greed.
No one touches anything.
Sloth. Wrath. Pride. Lust. And envy. 7. You can expect 5 more of these.
So 7 is actually, I thought it was the second. Turns out it's the third film by now very popular director David Fincher. Right before this, he did Alien 3 in 1992, which, coincidentally enough, I'm actually getting to talk about in a couple of weeks with Adonis Gonzalez on Game Over, man. A little bit of synergy there. Mm-hmm. But before that, he did like a Rick Springfield concert movie.
Oh, I had no idea about that.
In the late 80s, which apparently nothing notable about it whatsoever. I'm like, I can believe that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he directed a lot of music videos before films, right?
Yeah, I think so. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just so strange to think like Rick Springfield to the third Alien movie to 7.
Yeah.
Which is funny because, as it turns out, David Fincher was so disenfranchised by the experience on Alien 3, this is very well documented, that he actually never wanted to direct again. But it was because Seven was such a fascinating script that he was like, all right. And he turned out to make a really damn good movie. Now it's at this point where, Guy, I have a confession to make.
Yes.
Up until yesterday, I had never seen Seven. If you had asked me, what,
Samuel,
what is your greatest, like, you know, the highest item on your cinematic bucket list, so to speak? We all have those. We all have huge movies that we haven't seen. For years, I've said Seven. Like, I just never was in the mood for whatever reason. And as a matter of fact, last summer, I want to say, not last summer, 2019 summer. Remember those days? It was forever ago now.
I forgot about those. Crazy.
I also forgot. But I was coming up on my 2000th movie on Letterboxd, and I was like, oh man, I got to make it special. So I said, okay, I'm going to put it to a vote. I'll watch either Seven finally or The Room. And The Room won.
Of course.
Having now seen Seven, I'm very resentful about that.
I'm pretty sure I voted for The Room. I think I remember that poll.
You monster.
Because while Seven is good, The Room is better.
You bite your tongue, sir.
For being honest with ourselves.
Honest is an interesting word. You
know
what,
I'm
Guy?
Kidding. I'm kidding, of course.
I know. I'm going to put you on the spot. Guy, I'm going to ask you right now, what's your biggest bucket list item? What's off the top of your head? What would you say it is?
Ooh.
I know there are probably a few.
Yes, no, there are definitely a few. Because you've seen a lot of much more like 70s and 60s movies than I have. I've never seen The Conversation. That's one I've always wanted to see.
Oh, really? That's a good one.
American Graffiti is probably the biggest one. Because I'm big, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I've always wanted to see more of George Lucas's early work.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good movie.
THX.
Did you know there's a sequel to American Graffiti?
I did not. That's crazy.
Lots of weird sequels on this episode.
Yes.
As far as I know, there's no sequel to Seven. Like there's no movie called 8 or something.
Oh, I would have loved the number series.
There is a movie called 9, though. There's actually a couple movies called 9, so I guess it kind of balances out in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't until yesterday, and I was like, it's coming up on Extra Milestone. Now is the time, if ever there was one. And I watched it, and my eyes were glued to the screen. I could not look away. It was one of the most remarkable things I may have ever seen, and I have no hesitation about saying that. It is really fantastic. And and Jason Reed knows this, but I'm actually very behind on the works of David Fincher. I think by including Seven, I've now only seen 4 of his movies. I know he hasn't done like dozens and dozens of them, but I've seen Seven, Fight Club, The Social Network, and Alien 3. So I've got a lot to catch up on.
You haven't even seen my favorite of his.
Which is what?
Zodiac.
I haven't seen Zodiac. I
love Zodiac.
I haven't seen Gone Girl either. And
Gone Girl's also great.
Haven't seen Panic Room. Yeah. So you know what?
Panic Room's a solid one.
Now might be the time. I might have to just do a huge Fincher binge. Especially because his newer movie is coming out soon, isn't it?
It is Mank.
Mank, yeah. Gary Oldman. Mm-hmm. I have no idea if there's a release date on that, but yeah. So
who knows anymore?
Tis the season for a little finching, wouldn't you say?
For a little finching.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad you thought that was funny.
No, that was great. Tis the season for Fincher. Tis the Fincher.
And so I've said how I first came to it, which was just yesterday because of Extra Milestone. I'll ask you the same question I did before. Guy, what is your history with Se7en? I'm going to keep saying that, but
I saw it for the first time probably when I was around 15 or 16.
Oh my.
Yeah, no, it's probably too young for this very graphic film.
Yeah.
I feel like any age is too young for this.
I think it's more dreadful than it is graphic. That's the thing that got to me more is not necessarily like seeing, like there's some blood in this movie. There's some violence. There's of course corpses, 7 of them, in fact, but
yes,
it's just, especially in the last 30 minutes. And if you've seen the movie, which I certainly hope you have, and if not, stop listening right now.
Go watch it.
Go watch it, for by the love of God. It's on HBO Max
right now. Watch all 2 hours and 7 minutes of it, then come back. And
is it 2 hours and 7 minutes?
Yes,
that's perfect.
Right?
I love it. I was gonna save this to the end, but I'm gonna reveal it right now, and I'll let you continue your story in a second. But I found out one of the greatest facts I've ever read about a movie. 7 in 1995. Was the 7th highest grossing movie.
Whoa. What an insane coincidence.
I'm so glad. Can you imagine if it was like the 8th? How dissatisfying would that have been?
So disappointing.
I'm nothing, and I needed to read this after I needed my heart to be warmed. That's one of my favorite things I've ever read. Oh, there is some good in the universe.
Still some left somewhere.
Anyway, I apologize for interrupting. So you were saying that you were 15-ish years old. Do you remember the context, or was it just sort of on a whim?
It was around the same time I had started to get into Fincher movies. I think it might have been around the same time Gone Girl had come out, and I had seen that and thought it was really good. I'd seen his movies before that, but I decided to really do a deep dive after watching Gone Girl, and I watched Aliens Cubed, 7, Zodiac for the first time. Yeah. I kind of just went through all of his stuff and just have been a huge fan ever since. He's one of my favorite directors.
Nice. I'm gonna. Why not? I'm gonna ask. Do you have? Or no, you already said Zodiac is your favorite.
Zodiac is my number one. Yeah.
I think again, I've only seen 4 of them, but I think 7 is hands down my favorite. I think. I like The Social Network fine. I like Fight Club fine. Alien 3 I'm not a huge fan of. Got a lot left to watch, but thus far, man, this movie.
Yeah, no, this one's very good. This is definitely one of his best for sure.
I'm gonna be kind of it's such a weird feeling, seeing a movie for the first time when you should have seen it years ago. And almost just it's such a strange sensation to be like, wow, this is what it's been right there all along, and I never got to it. But now it's here, and goddamn. So 7, just to set a little context, is the story about 2 detectives played by Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt who realize that there is a serial killer that is using the 7 deadly sins as their modus operandi. I think I may have pronounced that wrong, and by may I mean definitely. Modus operandi is that every one of the 7 deadly sins gets a different victim, and it just has them completely baffled because there's no fingerprints, there's no real easy leads they can go on, there's no connection. These are all completely unmotivated. Just everyone gets killed for a different reason. Once they finally catch on to that, that's when the dread sort of begins, where they realize there are, after the 3rd one, there are 4 more people who are going to die if we don't do anything about this. And they just can't get a lead. And it's not until they figure out where the person lives that they go to the apartment, and that's when things start kicking into high gear, and they have to resort to a lot of really sort of unsanctioned activities, including talking to the FBI and getting on some secret invasion of privacy list and stuff like that. And so it's definitely a detective thriller. It's in that genre, but everything about this movie is dreary, and that is something that a lot of times pisses me off. I hate gloom in movies. I think this is going to sound like such a weird example, but I remember the worst one, the worst movie that I thought did this was the movie Let Me In. Did you ever see that? The remake of Let the Right One In?
Yes, I did see that one.
That is just this piss yellow movie, and it's it hurts to look at because there's no reason for it to look that way. And I don't know why that one specifically. I just remember it driving me completely nuts. And I realized while watching this movie, as a matter of fact, is because it feels so insincere almost everywhere else. It feels like they're just sort of trying to add this filter to the visual style of a movie to make it seem like it's darker or more serious, tonally and visually. This movie earns it. It is New York City, and it has no hope for humanity at all. Like, everything sucks in this movie. There are a couple of moments of levity, but for the most part, it is just miserable dreariness. And I love that it's willing to go into that so unforgivingly, especially when the whole premise of the movie is centered around just this senseless killer who's just preying on human beings for no good reason, because they feel like they have to. It depressed the hell out of me, and I kind of loved it for that, because so few movies are willing to go that deep in it. Does that all make sense, what I'm saying?
I agree. It is very, very dreadful, but I think at the same time, it's also a little more optimistic in a way, because I mean,
I'm very curious. How do you think?
Mainly, I know it's going to be hard to argue, but mostly through Morgan Freeman's character arc, right? Because he starts off the film very pessimistic and just sort of just angry at this city because of how, crime is taken over and everything's bad and all that. But after everything that happens at the end of the movie, when I believe it's his captain who asks him, what are you going to do now? He just says, I'll be around. And I like to think that that's him sort of learning from everything that had happened, and sort of the opposite of Psycho, not letting the darkness sort of take over his life and his view of the world. Because over the course of the movie, it feels like Brad Pitt is changing him, because he gives that, not really monologue, just, that exchange that they have at the bar towards the end of the movie, where Morgan Freeman is talking about how, everything's awful and everything. And then Brad Pitt says, no, you want me to agree with you, but I'm not going to agree with you because you believe in those things because you quit, not the other way around. Right. And so I always sort of took that last line as him being more optimistic, and also the very last line. Hold on. I have my notes.
I was going to bring this up because I love this little coda here.
The very last line, the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. Ernest Hemingway once said, I agree with the first part. Or second part, sorry. I agree with the second part is what he says. And I didn't feel like he thought that at the beginning of the movie. And I also found out during doing research that line was originally supposed to be the first line of the movie, that voiceover that Morgan Freeman gives.
Yeah. It turns out that was kind of tacked on to the ending. It was supposed to be, again, huge spoiler alert. The movie originally, I can't remember if it was David Fincher or someone else. They wanted it to end with just Brad Pitt shooting John Doe in the head, and then it would just end like really abruptly. And I think that would have been effective. It would have been equally as bleak, but I love that we just have this final line sort of putting a button on the entire arc of Morgan Freeman's character and kind of the movie as a whole, kind of the thesis of the entire thing,
And it's interesting that he would feel like that at the end of the movie after seeing some of the worst things anyone could see.
Oh gosh.
And so
what's in the box?
What was in the box?
What's funny?
What?
And this is going to seem strange, and I'm fascinated by if you or anyone listening has had the same reaction. I knew about that scene going in, obviously, because the internet just made me aware of it. And so I was not like surprised to find out what was happening. And that I'm okay with that. Like, there's only so much you can, keep yourself secret from. And while I can imagine it would have been amazing to get to experiencing, to get to experience that reveal for the first time while watching the movie, I think I'm fine the way it was. I think the other time when that happened was The Sixth Sense, and I was pissed off because I'm like, dang it, I wanted to get that reveal. This one, not as much, for whatever reason. But when Brad Pitt starts saying "What's in the box," the famous line, has this weird delivery on it that's not what you would expect if you just read it. Like, he's almost sort of whining and getting like really high pitched and stuff. I was so like, especially because for like a half hour up until that point, I knew what was going to happen. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh no, oh buddy.
Yeah.
I saw that and I started laughing.
Interesting.
I couldn't do anything else. I did like, I was so broken. I just, and I wasn't like dying laughing or anything, but I just sort of out loud was like, like, what do I do?
What an interesting reaction.
Have you ever had anything like that?
I don't think I have. Not that I can recall anyway. Especially not with this movie. Especially watching it again, I was still like, felt very bad for Brad Pitt in his situation.
That, you know what? Actually, come to think of it, did you know the twist when you first saw the movie?
Good question. I believe I did. Way back when.
Yeah. Because it's been, at that point the movie was like almost 20 years old, so it had made its way onto the internet.
I'm pretty sure.
I guess that's just kind of one of the things that will never be kept sacred again, unless some parent, God bless them, goes out of their way to like make sure that their child never finds out what happens in a certain movie until they're old enough to see it. That day has passed, and that's just something that we have to deal with.
Right.
It just was the thing that pushed me over the edge. And I was like, I can't take it anymore. I have to let something out. And as it turns out, it was a laugh. I just couldn't help it. I don't know what it was.
Interesting Freudian response.
It really was, yeah. You know what's funny? This movie was nominated for 1 Oscar for editing.
For editing?
The editing is great.
It is. It's not the standout thing.
Lost to Apollo 13.
For editing.
Which I'm like, whatever.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
that's fine. Serious, there's so many awards this should have been nominated for. Picture for 1.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that was 95, so Braveheart won.
Oh, of course.
What's with that?
Yeah.
I've actually never seen Braveheart.
I have, a long time ago.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Is it as meh as I've heard?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's good, but like, also it's Mel Gibson, so like...
That's true.
So, it's problematic by today's standards, but
And then I think at least, like, are Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman both lead actors, do you think? I think it's a two-hander.
I know, I agree.
Yeah, so they could have very easily been both nominated.
Yeah.
And I like their rapport in this movie. It's very much a good cop, bad cop movie. And I like that the movie never really takes a side about which one of their which method for approaching this crime is the better one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, Brad Pitt gets punished horrendously at the end.
Yes,
but I don't think that's necessarily the movie making a statement. I think it's just kind of the natural progression of what this killer is going to do. And so I like that there is room for both. There's room for sort of the, intellectual, sort of academic, methodical approach that Morgan Freeman has. Mm-hmm. And then also the seriously, let's do whatever we can by any means we can, very aggressively method that Brad Pitt has.
Right, because they both sort of work out at different points until the end.
And until the end. And you know what? That ending... A lot of people had to fight for that ending. The studio was just fighting tooth and nail, like maybe it can be something else. Like maybe it's the dog's head in the box. They're like, no,
that wouldn't be that emotionally impactful if it was just the dog's head.
Thank goodness it wasn't. Can you imagine?
Yeah, no, that'd be bad. That'd be a very anticlimactic ending for this movie.
And you know what? I was watching the movie, and there was that scene where Gwyneth Paltrow and Morgan Freeman like have breakfast together or something, and she's like, "So, I'm pregnant," and I'm like, "No,
I know
that I didn't know."
Okay,
so that really added to it.
Yeah, no, that definitely adds much more pain to it.
Yeah, we're being a little sporadic here, but I want to ask, Guy, if you had to sort of summarize, and we've talked about a lot of it, so maybe a little thesis combining them all.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to summarize why you think this movie works so well, what do you think it is? Because it's something that I'm still, having just seen it, I'm still trying to sort of piece together a little bit. So you've had a little more experience with it. What do you think it is that makes it so effective 25 years later?
That's a good question. I realized this time around that I think the pacing helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very incredibly well paced, the way the killings come in and how, sort of takes place over 7 days.
Yep.
And it just moves. And, next thing you know, you're at the end where you're just like, what's going to happen?
Yeah. I did not feel a second of this movie's runtime.
Exactly.
Not that 2 hours and 7 minutes is like horrendously long or anything, but that's longer than a lot of movies. And it just kept chugging along. And so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's a breeze to get through mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the murders roll in and how brutal each of them is in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is specifically. Honestly don't know either. I haven't seen this movie that many times, but
oh yeah,
I don't know what it is specifically, but it definitely, it just moves,
I think part of it, at the very least, is the unstoppability of all of it. They fail at the end of this movie. Yeah. Like, everyone that John Doe set out to kill is now dead. Like, the mission has been accomplished, misguided as it may have been.
Mm-hmm.
It worked. And so it's just so bleak, and there's this constant hope, like maybe they'll get a lead, maybe they'll figure something out, maybe they'll gain the upper hand, and they never do.
Not at all.
And the movie has no, again, as I said earlier, has no illusions about that. It is very much leaning into the dark side of the human psyche. And now it is at this point where we bring up, and I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but it's kind of the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
John Doe. It is Kevin Spacey, who of course has been in the public eye for different reasons than anyone would hope over the past 3 years now. And there are a lot of different ways to sort of approach it. I am very much on the side, and I know there's plenty of arguments to the contrary, but I am very much on the side of trying at least to separate the art from the artist. Now, I know that there are lives out there that have been permanently changed by this man, and that's something that most of us will never be able to even comprehend. So obviously there's definitely room for a lot of argument. Are you kind of in the same boat, Guy, or do you have a different perspective on it, or what do you think?
No, I'm 100% with you that he has ruined a lot of people's lives with the things that he has done, and I agree with you. I think, I try to separate the art from the artist as much as I can, as much as humanly possible. Because, I still like the first 2 X-Men movies, even though Bryan Singer directed those.
Yeah.
And, we now know how gross of a human being he is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like we were talking about before, Kevin Spacey has been in some of the most popular movies of the past 30 years, so it's kind of hard to avoid him entirely.
It really is. I think it certainly helps in this very specific case that he's a serial killer and the villain.
Yeah, so you're okay with it.
That certainly helps.
Yeah.
And plus, he's not in the movie that much. So I wanted to make sure we address that. But yeah, if you can't watch this movie, then I totally get it. And I think that is something that totally should not be, I think it's certainly a case-by-case basis kind of thing where yes, it is possible to separate art from the artist because we do it all the time.
Right.
We see things having no idea even who created it, what they've done with their lives are like, happens every day, like hundreds and hundreds of times. It's about whether or not we should, and I think it's completely up to anyone. I think, like, again, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it is something that is your choice,
Right.
And so
totally
I think in this case, exactly. And so I believe in this case that it's at least convenient in some sort of strange way. And while it did sort of take away a little bit from just being able to be completely wrapped up into it, I think the movie still works tremendously well. And
agreed.
I really, really loved it. And of course, I'm sure I can't wait to just, well, actually, I can wait to watch this again.
Yeah, no, it's a hard one to sit through.
It's a hard one to sit through. And man, the my teeth were clenched harder than they've ever been clenched. Just that entire ride through the desert feels like it took forever. Like it felt like 45 minutes of just talking and building up to the twist ending. And so I think that makes it only more effective on rewatch potentially. And so I look forward to the day. I can't say I'm necessarily excited for it, but this is a movie that I'm so delighted to finally have seen. And I can't wait to just discover more and more about why I love it. And one last thing I want to bring up is sort of the ideology of this movie, which is a little bit hard to suss out because obviously it involves a lot of biblical elements. Again, the 7 deadly sins, and sort of a lot of the research they do is these sort of older like tomes, that were written centuries ago. And the villain is very much inspired by sort of some godly entity that they've presumably just conjured up out of thin air. And so I want to ask, what do you make, and I know this is a hard question, but what do you make of this movie's view of humanity? We sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, how you think it's a little bit more optimistic. Do you think that goes for the entire thing, how that's kind of what the viewer is meant to take away, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's what the viewer's supposed to take away, because you were talking about the car ride to the desert a second ago, and through that car ride, Kevin Spacey reveals his sort of his motivations for everything, why he's doing everything. And I realized watching it this time that his beliefs actually line up a lot with Morgan Freeman's beliefs, but John Doe is sort of like the worst version of Morgan Freeman, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
that taken to its illogical conclusion, to the point of ruining countless lives.
Yes. Yes. No, exactly. And I think that is sort of another part of Freeman's character's, realization that, he shouldn't be as angry at the world as he was, and that he should change. Because I think the first time that happens is when Brad Pitt and he have that conversation at the bar, but then that happens with John Doe, and that really sort of confirms it for him, which is why I think at the end of the movie he says, I'll be around. And then the final Ernest Hemingway quote at the end of the movie.
I think that's a lot to think about. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure where I stand, of course, because of just how draining the movie is. I'm a little bit more inclined to look at this as a pessimistic movie, but you brought up a lot of really fantastic points that I think make a lot of sense. So that's definitely something I'm now considering. And yeah, that's kind of the thing I love the most about this movie, is just, while it is a wonderfully functional detective thriller and sort of a moody, like, art piece kind of tucked away in the middle of it, it is also, it seems to be sort of this thesis on humanity, much in the same way. You know what it actually reminded me of was your favorite movie, The Dark Knight, where
it's very, very similar to that movie.
I'm like, oh, this is kind of like the inspiration for that Joker right here.
Right.
And I could definitely see it. And yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack in this movie. I wish I could have contributed something more thoughtful to it, but
I mean, it's your first time watching it, so I mean,
yeah. We've all got to have a first time for everything, So
exactly. I've seen this movie a couple of times, so I had some thoughts.
Suffice it to say, I thought it was really, really effective in just about every way, and I can't wait to see it again. Here I am, 25 years later, still appreciating it. So
yeah, it holds up.
I was glad to have gone on this journey with the movie and with you, Guy. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Extra Milestone.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I look forward to getting to do it again sometime, wouldn't you say?
Yes, same here. Same here.
Yeah. So, Guy, why don't you let the listeners know where can they find you on this worldwide web of ours?
You can find me on Twitter at Guy_SimonsJR. JR is short for Junior.
Ah, is that what it is?
Yes. for those of you who didn't know. And you can also find me on Instagram under the same handle. So, synergy.
Nice. I'm also on Twitter at Noland Sam. It's just my two names, but reversed. Thanks, Twitter.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Exciting.
And I'm also on the Letterboxd, just my name, Sam Noland. That's where I log everything I watch and where I spend most of my time online. I also host 2 other shows on the Cinemaholics Patreon account. It is Game Over, Man, the Alien and Predator podcast, and A Nice Place to Visit, the Twilight Zone podcast. Both of those I co-host with Adonis Gonzalez, and those are yours every single week for as low as $2 a month. It's a really fun time. We hope that you'll join us there. And without any further ado, I believe that is all we got from the shower drain of humanity where everything ends up eventually. I'm Sam Noland.
I don't have a joke, but I'm Guy Simons.
And I
wish I had thought of something, but I haven't.
And we'll see you on the next Extra Milestone.